tonight's episode, transitioning from online to in-person. There are so many differences between learning to play online and in person. I know that a lot of people, and this started back to COVID, this is my second event on this topic. And of course, every time I have one, I always improve upon what I did the previous time. But there have been so many people that have learned to play Mahjong, especially because of COVID, online, and they have not experienced what it's like to play socially in person, which is such a wonderful thing. But there are definitely some differences. So let's take a look at this chart and talk a little bit about, because I'm going to go into details during the presentation, the differences just briefly here. So you don't build the walls when you're playing online, but you do in person. As far as determining who East is, you don't do that on the computer. The computer does it for you. And when I talk about these different aspects of the online play, please note that there are several online platforms and not all of them have the same features. So if you're playing on one that may have a feature that I'm talking about, or even a partial feature of what I'm talking about, just understand that I don't know, I'm not familiar with every single one of the platforms. All right, breaking the wall also is not done online. Dealing out the tiles is automatically done for you online. Verifying your tile count before the game begins is automatically done online. Doing the Charleston is one of those things where you have a little bit of input in that, but you're not handling the tiles in person. You're not having to place them where they belong. You have some of the computer doing it for you, but not all of it. Pushing out the wall is not done online as opposed to in person. So the computer does all the dealing, all the wall tiles. Most of the online platforms don't even have a wall showing. Some of them do, but they certainly don't get pushed out to the middle of the table. Picking from the wall is done automatically with the online platforms. Randomly discarding tiles. This is something where some of the online platforms do randomly discard them, but most of them have the tiles lined up. So when you're playing in person, they are randomly discarded. So again, this is one of the things where some online platforms do it one way, some do it another way, but certainly you to know that when you get to playing in person, they're not going to be all lined up. And I know that this could be a challenge for some. Properly racking the tiles, that's something that you don't have any say in online. That's all done for you automatically. Naming discards. The computers name the discards for you, but in person, you need to name the discards. So getting used to naming them might seem simple to you, but then you are playing in person, you've never had to name them. You might have to think a little bit about that. So I recommend trying it out while you're playing online, or maybe even turning off the volume and naming them yourself to get used to it. Calling and exposing, again, automatically done for you on the computer. Joker exchanges, another thing, automatically done for you with the online gaming platforms. Okay, let's go ahead and dive a little bit more into this. Now, during the event, I'm going to be playing some small clips that I've taken from my educational video series. I wanted to have the demonstrations for you, which I think is a lot better than me just talking through it, although I'm going to be talking through a lot of stuff anyway. All right, so let's go ahead and play this. Before we start to play the game, we need to set up the tiles and build the walls. So the first thing that you do is everybody will share in turning over the tiles so that they are face down. This goes a lot quicker when there are 4 people doing this. Once all the tiles are face down, everybody will share in mixing the tiles to make sure that if you'd already played a game, there are no groupings of multiple tiles sitting together and ending up in the same spot in the wall tiles. Of course, having 4 sets of hands is more than enough. If everybody were to be mixing all at the same time, it's going to be a little bit more challenging, especially if someone has long nails. So having about 2 people at any given time mixing is more than enough. Once the mixing is done, everybody builds their walls as follows. There will be 19 tiles across, and then 2 tears. So you will have 2 layers of 19 tiles across. And each person is doing this at the same time. You will verify that you have 19 because everybody's racks are a little different in length, and you want to be sure that if you have one of the shorter racks that you have enough tiles here. So you simply would count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19. And I have 19, as you can see. Before I go on to building the other walls, I do want to mention something to you. And I'll just reverse this right here. Okay. I've got one tier already built here. Now, you don't want to build your wall 1 tile at a time. Everybody's going to be taking a nap if you do that, and people do want to get on and play the game. So instead of doing it 1 tile at a time, grab 2 or 3, and do it. Or you can use 2 hands and do your building. That just helps speed it up because everybody is anxious to get on with the game. Now I'm going to build the walls for everybody else. I also want to mention that after you build your wall, you could run your hand right over the front of it, and that will straighten out any uneven tiles that you have. Now, as you can see, everybody has their walls built, 19 across and 2 tears for each one of the players. So there's the first video, and as you can see, you have a lot more to do in person with building the walls. Now, I make it a point to talk about how to build the walls as quickly as possible. I still play with people that have been playing for a long time that build the walls with 1 tile at a time. And honestly, everybody wants to start the next game. So nobody wants to wait for that one last dangling player to build their walls. So this is why I point out some of the more efficient ways to build the walls. Another thing is when you build the walls, the quickest way is to do the bottom and then build the top. And what I explain to people when they say, well, why? Because I see people will they'll put 2 tiles down or 1 tile down and then put another on top of that, then put another tile down, put another on top of it. And I compare it to building a house or a building. You know, you build the foundation and then you work up because that's the more efficient way of doing it. You don't build a part of the building going up in a linear direction, and then build the next section next to it. That would not be efficient, nor would it work as far as the structure goes. So here's the next one. We've got determining who is east, breaking the wall, the deal, verifying the number of tiles you have before the deal and before east discards, and racking the tiles. We're going to start out this lesson by determining who the east player is. And the east player is the player that begins the game. So let's go ahead and start by rolling the dice. Now I have thrown a 9. The next player will roll the dice in a counterclockwise motion. So player 2, who is to my right, will roll the dice as well. And then it will continue around the table, again in a counterclockwise motion or to the right. And the next player will roll, and then the next player will roll. Whoever has the highest roll on the dice becomes the east player. So let's say I rolled a 7 and I'm the east player. The first thing you want to do is pick up the dice from the table and move them over just by the next player, who will be east's rack. This indicates to them that they are now the next player who will be rolling the dice to break the wall. All right, so we have rolled a 7 on the dice, and now it's time to break the wall. Breaking the wall in Mahjong is very much like splitting a deck of cards. It prevents cheating. And I'm not going to go over how one cheats in Mahjong, but trust me when I say that cheating does go on in almost every game, including Mahjong. So this breaking the wall does prevent that, as I said, just as it's done in cards. Now, what I'm going to do now that I have pushed out my entire wall is I am going to count out 7 tiles, including the top and bottom tiers here. And I'm going to show you several ways to do this break, and then you will eventually adapt to your own style of breaking the wall. 2, 4, 6, 7. There is the break in the wall, and these are the tiles that we pull back and hold. Now, if you hold the tiles with a little bit of light pressure on both ends, they will easily move. If you grab the tiles like this, the chances are they're going to collapse on you. So make sure that that doesn't happen, because then it's going to be challenging getting them right in the same order from where they came. All right, so hold them like this, a little bit of pressure, and pull them back. That's one way to do the break. Another way to do the break is to count the tiles out right from where they sit by your rack, in front of your rack. So you pull them out a little bit, and then you could go 2, 4, 6, 7. And then you could do the same thing that we did before by putting a little bit of pressure on the tiles and moving them very carefully to the center of the table. All right, I'll show you another way. All right, so the same thing would apply if you wanted to push them out. And instead of separating them out the way I did originally, you could then pull back 2, 4, 6, and 7. and you could do it that way. And I'm going to show you one more way. I want you to have all the ways that I've seen it done, and I'm sure there's probably some I'm not going to get to, but nonetheless, these are the most common. Okay, so the next one would be you push it out a little bit, and you hold back your 7, 2, 4, 6, 7, and then these tiles are moved out of the way, and the rest of the tiles are pushed out by using the actual rack. All right, and then you have to put these tiles back in place exactly how they came. Now I want you to note something right now. This is very important. When you break the wall, the tiles that are counted out from the dice that are your break in the wall come back and sit exactly where they came from. To the right, this is exactly how they came from. And I'm going to explain to you why this is important. Well, first of all, the most important thing of all to me is that this is where they came from, so this is where they belong. The second thing is that when we pick tiles from the wall and push out additional tiles, it goes in a clockwise motion or to the left. So we pick to the right in Mahjong and we push out the wall tiles to the left. With this opening here, it's a nice little lead-in to remind us of which way we're going to be pushing the walls. Okay, so that is the reason why it is important to leave the tiles right where they are. When you start playing with other players, you're going to start to see that there are a lot of things that are done differently because people were taught differently. Maybe they weren't taught the right way, or they weren't taught at all and they've learned it themselves. Regardless of what it is, we can't change how everybody else does things, but you can learn the right way and you could do it the right way. So if you are to see somebody's tiles sitting here or sitting here, you'll know that it's supposed to be done this way. All right, now that the wall is broken and you have an idea of the different ways to do the break, it's time for the tiles to get dealt out or dealt in, however you want to refer to it. But I do want to mention that in Mahjong, dealing is not the same as in a card game. In a card game, you have a dealer who deals all of the cards out for the other players, and that is required of the dealer. In Mahjong, the dealer is the individual player. So everybody picks in their own tiles. And yes, it's still called a deal, and picks their own tiles. So I'm going to pick my first two. And let me show you that again. First two. They are picked in groupings of 4 tiles, 2 from the top and 2 from the bottom. We pick tiles during the game counterclockwise to the right, and it's the same way when the deal is done. The next player will pick their 4 tiles, and the next player will pick their 4, and it continues around. When it gets back to the East player, who is the starting player for not only starting the deal, but for discarding their first tile, East will then take another set of 4 tiles. All right, now we've run out of wall tiles on the table. So how do we push them out? We push them out to the left. And to the left is clockwise. All right, now the next player will take their tiles And now we continue on until we get back to east again. Now east will take another set of 4 and it will continue around until we get back to east again. And now east has 3 sets of 4 for a total of 12 tiles. East has the advantage of having 1 more tile to start with than the others, and this was mentioned in the previous lesson. So for east to pick those 2 tiles, the way it is done is they take the first and the third tiles. I'm going to show you, everybody always says, well, why do they do it that way? And most often you're going to hear, because that's the way it's done. But I'm going to show you why it's done that way, and it's pretty much a shortcut. So hang on, and I want to go ahead and deal out the rest of the tiles to everybody else, and then I'm going to go back and repeat that so you could see why east takes the first and third tiles. Okay, so now the next player to the right takes their 13th tile from the first available, which was on the bottom, and the next, and the next. All right, now we have 14 tiles for east, 13 for each of the other players. All right, now if we reverse that and start out again, if east were to take 1 tile and this player take the second tile, the next tile for their 13th, and the next player takes their next tile for 13, and finally this tile, the next tile for east to take is the top one here, which actually ends up being the first and third tile. All right, so that's why that is done like that. It's just a little bit of a shortcut. And I'm going to go ahead and do that first and third again and deal out the last tile to everybody. Alrighty, there we go. Beautiful. Everybody's got their tiles in. And before we move on, I want to mention that before the tiles are put up on everybody's rack, it is important that all players verify that they have the correct number of tiles. And this is why we leave them in the groupings on the top of our card until that is done. Once you've verified you have the right number of tiles, we can move on to the next step. And now it is time to what we call rack our tiles. And racking our tiles is merely putting them up on the rack, and it would be, this part of the rack is called the sloped part of the rack. All right, so this one is the Charleston, which again is something that you're going to have to get used to doing in person as opposed to how it's done online. All right, so the first Charleston consists of the first right, the across, and the first left. And when you take 3 tiles from your hand for the first right, they get placed right to the right of you on the outside, just like this. And everybody then takes their tiles and puts them on their rack. And I'm just fast forwarding it. And then we're going to have the second pass, which is called the across. And actually the league did change it to first across. And they go inside of the wall tiles like that. That's the second pass of the first Charleston. And then everybody's going to rack their tiles. Speed it up there. All right. The next pass coming up is going to be the first left. And here, what I'm talking about, I'm just going to pause this for a second, is that during this first left, if your tiles are really, really good and you have one hand that's forming and you don't think you're going to have 3 tiles to pass to continue, this is when you want to heed the warning. You want to say to everybody, go slow after the first left because I might be stopping it. That's what I'm talking about here. Very important to do that during this first left, because if somebody picks up and looks at their second left, it's too late. And I do mention here the importance of continuing the Charleston and not stopping it just because you're torn between 2 hands or you're confused, because you're giving up looking at 12, potentially 12 more tiles during that second Charleston. All right, now, during the first left, you can do a blind pass, and here I'm doing a demonstration of that. So I'll let that play through so you could see. I have put 2 tiles down, but I need 1 more because I don't have a third. I have a third, but I don't want to take another tile from my hands. And so what I'm going to do is take 1 from the incoming pass and add it to the tiles and pass them on. And that's a blind pass. It's very simple. Of course, when you're on the computer, you're not thinking about this because the computer does it. And I think a lot of people who have learned online as well don't even take advantage of that blind pass and use it properly. So it's a very good thing. And believe me, it comes in handy a lot of times if you've got a nice hand coming in. Okay, so that's the first left. Now the second Charleston is the second left, the must across, and the last right. And so we're going to start doing the second left here. And as you can see, the second left gets stacked in a pyramid. This indicates that we're starting the second Charleston. And it's a nice visual because you do 2 lefts back to back, and it helps. And I always mention that everybody should, or at least somebody should call out the passes. I know it gets a bit confusing during the Charleston, especially if you're chit-chatting a little bit more than you should, to keep track of where you're at. So if somebody says first left, across, you know, that kind of thing, you will remember where you're at a lot better. And then I just go over that passing here and how it gets stacked as a pyramid and why, which I just talked about. And now we're going to be doing our second across, which again goes right in the middle of the wall tiles, just like that. So now we're on that second pass of the second Charleston, because they are divided into the first and the second. And the reason is the first Charleston is mandatory. You must do those first 3 passes. Matter of fact, somebody just recently asked the Mah Jongg teacher about that, if you had to do the Charleston, and you do have to do. All right, the last right, which is the last pass of the second Charleston, is when you could do a blind pass again. And I'm going to do, I think, a demonstration right here. Yep. So I only had two tiles, no, 1 tile, and I took 2 from the incoming players right to me. All right, I think that's it for the Charleston, and I can go on to the next one here. Let me just stop sharing for a second. So the Charleston can be a little daunting when you're a newer player. And I do know that a lot of people that come to me and ask questions about the Charleston mention that they don't do the Charleston in person. Their group has decided just not to do it, or that some of them do just the first Charleston and they always stop it before the second Charleston. I'm telling you, it is the most important part of the game. This is when you build your hand. I can't stress this enough to you guys. I am literally, I get a new tile sometimes on the last right and during the optional across. So please do not stop the Charleston unless you have one really, really strong hand. My rule of thumb has always been if you have 3 tiles to pass, go ahead and pass it. Um, Lately, I'm coming across some really interesting hands where I do have more than 3 tiles to pass, but one of those might be a pair, part of a pair, or a flower, which I don't like to pass. So I'm changing my philosophy a little bit to say that basically, if you don't have 3 tiles to pass, or if you're put in a very odd predicament where you might not want to have to pass something that you normally, say that you don't want to pass. So just be flexible, but just note strong, strong hand is when you stop the Charleston, not torn between 2 hands, not confused by any means at all. The next item we're going to be talking about is picking and discarding. All right, this is another thing where, well, so in person, picking and discarding, you just have to name the tiles when you discard them, and you have to rack them. So here's an example where I'm showing you discards must be named. So when you put down this 6 crack, you need to say 6 crack. This little chart, some of you might have seen this before. So naming tiles is something that, for many years before there were online platforms, nobody ever thought twice about it. Everybody named the tiles the same way. Since the online gaming platforms have come about and people have learned online, and then I think it's spreading to instructors throughout the country, and they're teaching the naming improperly. So there's definitely a right and a wrong way to name our tiles. This in particular, this little cartoon is all about the red and green dragon. When you discard a dragon, you name it red, green, soap, or white. We don't say red dragon, green dragon, white dragon. Now, most of the gaming platforms do put the word dragon on it. I guess it's because of the way they do it in the Asian countries. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that I Love Maj does name the tiles properly, and that I'm really very grateful for. It's the same thing with our winds. We don't say west wind, east wind, north wind. We say east, west, north, south. We make things simple. My whole thing is, why say 2 words when you can say 1? Why not make it as easy as possible? All right, and let's just talk briefly about the 1 BAM. The 1 BAM is named 1 BAM. That 1 BAM has become a very popular fellow in the past, I don't know, I want to say 5 to 10 years. But that 1 BAM has been given so many names. We have 1 BAM bird, 1 damn bird, a 1 birdie BAM, 1 bird, 1 birdie, just birdie BAM. I mean, you name it, the 1 BAM has many, many names now. And honestly, it is a 1 BAM. Why did it take on so many different names, and why are people learning to name the 1 BAM differently? Well, people get the 1 BAM confused with a flower. I'm not quite sure how that is, because a 1 BAM, unless you're using one of the older vintage sets with the sprout BAM, also known as the pineapple BAM, that one could possibly look like a flower a little bit more, although if you look closely, it still has the feet and the beak and all that. But yeah, it looks a little bit more like a flower. But if it's a bird with a beak and the feet and the feathers, I mean, it is a bird. So try to, these are little things I tell you because I'm giving you the proper way to play in the way that the National Mahjong League rules state. If you can, try to make some of these changes little by little. Because when you're playing in public and you're playing with better players or experienced players or people that have been playing for years, they don't say anything, but they're thinking something about the way we are naming our tiles because we're not used to hearing Green Dragon, North Wind, Birdie Bam, and all that. All right. Is it going to hurt anything? Really? No, in the long run, it's not going to hurt anything. But I do like to play the right way. Put this chart here and the flowers. I do hear some people saying one flower or uh, some flower. They use the abbreviation of the seasons on them, and there are numbers. Those numbers and word abbreviations mean nothing in American Mahjong. The jokers can be named three ways. If you are learning on, or if you have learned online, you're going to hear it say joker when it's discarded. I prefer to say same because you're not really alerting everybody at the table that you've discarded a joker. Because 9 out of 10 times, unless you discard a joker at the very end of the game as a safe tile, everybody's going to be on high alert. Oh, she discarded a joker. She must be playing a singles and pairs hand. She must be waiting for one of a pair or one of a single grouping, etc. So just name it same. It's easy, no problem at all there. All right, let's see what else I talked about here. Did a lot of that. I think that's it pretty much for starting. Big thing though that I talk about here, right there, when you see me pick and rack, most important thing of all is to pick and rack your tiles. You're not used to doing this when you play on the computer. Make sure that it is fully racked. And I do have a little bit more, a chart on that coming up as well. All right, so racking. When picking a tile, it should be placed fully on your rack. There is no such thing as tapping. Let's take a look at the pictures here. No tapping on the top of the rack. Again, there are people that are learning to do this. The computer racks the tile for you, but if for any reason someone has shared this information with you, it is incorrect. It should not even just hit the side of the slope of your rack. No partial placement before you discard, but rather fully and completely placed on the slope part of your rack. If it is any one of these things, you do any one of these three things prior to the fully racking your tile, and someone calls the previous discard, they are entitled to it. It leaves a window of opportunity for the previous discard. Again, this is something you don't think about when you're playing online, but this is pretty important. Just get used to pick from the wall, put it on your rack. Pick, rack, pick, rack. All right, let's see, calling a discard. And you can call and expose when you're calling a discard on any hand that has an X in front of the value. That stands for exposed. Again, you don't have to think much about it when you're playing online, except for the fact that your hand you'll have an invalid mahjong happening if you do call on something with a C next to it and then try to declare mahjong. So the computer automatically knows how to do that. All right, when a discard goes out that you want, you need to verbalize it. You need to say call. On the computer, what do? You hit the button call. So you've got to get very used to that verbal. You can say, hold up, I want that, I'll take that, but you've got to let everybody know that you want that tile. That is a rule. You don't just pick it up from the table and then put it up on top of your rack. If you're not sure, say, hold up, I need a minute so you could think about what you want to take. So here's a 6 p.m. There's a demo going on here where I'm showing you pick up the tile, put it up on the flat part of the rack first, and then bring the other tiles up, just like that. There's a completed Kong with the arrow pointing to it. So when you call, you take the tile from the table, put it up on the rack, doesn't go in your rack, it goes on the rack, and you then bring the rest of the tiles up. Okay? And then I give another demo here. Again, where I have picked up a tile and then I discard. Remember, you must discard after you call, because when you call, you picked up a 14th tile and you play with 13, and your 14th tile is your Mah Jongg. And it is courteous to have spaces between your exposures. Some people that I played with, even a few lately, have put their tiles together rather than leaving spaces. It is courteous to leave spaces between your groupings because some of the tiles look so similar that it's very confusing. And that's why you do that. You don't need to put them in order. You just need to leave spaces. Matter of fact, you don't want to put them in the order of the hand on the card because you don't want to make it easy for your opponents to know what you're playing. Next is, again, I'm demonstrating it again. I call the 6 dot. I put it on the top of my rack. Be sure that you look at what you're picking up, that you're picking up the correct tile. Otherwise, you would be dead. Okay, and then nest your jokers in the middle of your exposures. That's also a nice, courteous thing to do. Sometimes if you have the jokers on the end and the exposure, another exposure goes up and it's too close to it, it could be confusing where the jokers belong. So that's just another nice little thing to do. All right, once you call a discard, the game continues to the right of the caller. You never go backwards. That means somebody may miss a turn depending on who's calling the tile. You never go backwards. You always continue to the right. So just remember, that's what I'm talking about here. And I'm demonstrating in this particular part when somebody loses a turn because of who had called the tile. Okay? All right. Remember, never go backwards. All right, that's that. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, so joker exchanges. Another thing, you click on the tile when you're playing online, but this is a very important part of the game. You need to announce your intentions and then you do a hand-to-hand exchange. And you definitely don't want to miss a valuable joker. So look around the table, make sure if somebody has a joker in an exposure, you keep that in your mind and look all the time before you discard. Just look around the table at the exposures. And this is the way you do it. You politely ask for the joker. So you say something like, may I have your joker, please? You take the tile that you have, the natural tile, and hand it to the player that has the joker in their exposure and ask them for it nicely. May I have your joker, please? Don't touch anybody else's tiles. So here I am demonstrating it, asking, may I have your joker, please? And then I take the joker and put it in my rack. And then I discard. So joker exchanges are done after you've started your turn. Okay, now I do want to talk about with the joker exchanges. When you call a discard and put up an exposure, this is very important because I get asked about this a lot. And then you notice in your hand that you have a tile and you could do a joker exchange from somebody's rack. And you realize that when you put up the exposure, you only put 3 up, but you actually need a Kong instead of a Pung. You cannot do the joker exchange and add the joker to that Pung to make it a Kong. The league considers this a separate action. So instead, you have to do the joker exchange, put it in your rack, and use it at a future point as you see fit. However, in the same situation, you have called a tile, you put up the exposure, and you have it completed the way you want it. You then do a joker exchange and realize that that joker is going to complete a Mah Jongg. That is permissible, but it's still completing what's in your rack and not adding it on top of the rack, because the exposure on top of your rack is a done deal. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk about dead hands, and this is another pretty important thing when it comes to playing in person. When you play on the computer, you have an opportunity to call somebody's hand dead. But if you're uncertain about it, you're probably not going to hit that little dead button, and it looks different on every one of the platforms. And I'm pretty sure that every one of the platforms has the ability to call a player's hand dead. One of the things about calling a player's hand dead in person that differs than on a computer is that in person, if you said to somebody, your hand is dead, and you're basing that on what they have exposed and all of their, you know, they're playing one hand and all of the tiles for the pair that they need are discarded on the table. You know, you're going to call that player's hand dead, and they're going to say, you're right, I'm dead. Or they might say, my hand is not dead. You're wrong. We do miss things. There are times, even now, I look at it, I think somebody's dead, and then I realize, oh no, they could be playing that as well. So if the player does not agree with you, then they continue to play, and at the end, you work it out. And if, depending on who was right or who was wrong, will depend on whether that player pays you or whether you pay the player. And just something, I'm not going to go into detail about all of that, but that's important to know. That's a big difference. Okay. Now, another player is required to call a hand dead. This is in the rule book now and in several places. For a long time, there was no mention of that, or it would be mentioned, but it was never firm and in writing. It is in writing. A player cannot call their own hand dead. Okay, well, let me rephrase that. A player can call their hand dead, but they're not supposed to. And the league has it in writing. A player's hand is not dead until another player declares their hand dead. Okay, that sounds like a lot there. But just know, another player must declare a player's hand dead for it to be dead. Whether or not you call a player's hand dead could benefit both you or the player. It could be a good thing or not. So, for instance, if you call somebody's hand dead, they will stop playing, and you and the other 2 players get more picks from the wall. However, if you call a player's hand dead and there were jokers up in exposure prior to the hand going dead, the jokers are still available for exchange. So you might want to be a little sly there and not call their hand dead, because you want to grab the joker. And maybe everybody's thinking the same thing. Uh, they wait till they grab the joker and then they call the player's hand dead. Okay, that's another reason you might want to wait. The other thing is you may not want to call a player's hand dead, because if you do, they're not going to be discarding tiles from their rack anymore. They may have a tile you need sitting in their rack. So there's benefits either way. You have to just think about which is going to be the best for you. Either way you want to do it is fine. It is not a requirement that you call somebody's hand dead. Now, this is another thing that I want to talk about, is that when you're playing on the computer, it's more mechanical. We're not in person. We don't have the emotions wrapped up into the personal aspect of the play as we do in person. And very often, people's feelings get a little hurt. They get embarrassed. I mean, a couple of other things that have happened when people call, even getting really upset about it. But it's part of the game. So get used to that. Calling your hand dead or calling another player's hand dead is all part of the game. It's not about you personally. We all make mistakes during the game. We've all done that. I don't know that there's anybody who has not made a mistake playing Mahjong. And it's not a real big deal, but it is one of the rules of the game. So just try not to feel embarrassed or take it personally. And I did talk about this a little earlier about contesting the dead hand declaration, which you can do in person. All right, let's go through some in-person game reminders. The wall tiles, they don't get pushed out online, but in person, they get pushed out at a 45-degree angle, as you saw in some of the videos. As the walls get depleted, we need to push them up. Just put your finger at the very back end of the wall, push them up so that they're always in the middle of the table and easy for everybody to reach. Leave spaces between your exposures. This is a courteous thing to do. When you call a tile, verbally announce it. Don't just pick it up from the table. I know that I do have experiences with people who just pick it up and put it up there. And when it's your turn to actually pick from the wall and also you're calling a tile, you're more apt to do that. But the rule is you must verbalize a call regardless. Pick up the tile from the table first and place it on the flat part of your rack, and then bring the other tiles from your rack up to complete the exposure. Now, this rule, this last bullet point has changed over the years, and there's still some uncertainty about it at this point. I believe the last I heard is that somebody asked again about this and they're going to take it to the committee. As the rule stands right now, before you discard a tile, you can modify your exposure by changing it from a pung to a kong, a quint to a kong, a quint to a pung, any which way, with the number of tiles you need in the grouping. But you cannot change an exposure if you've put up the wrong tile. That is extremely important. So if you do that, hopefully somebody will call your hand dead if you have an erroneous exposure, because that's pretty obvious. Some of the things you can pretty much say, you can't really tell, I'm not sure. And joker exchanges, you must verbalize your intent to do a joker exchange. Please be courteous when you ask for your joker. Don't grab somebody's joker. Do a hand-to-hand exchange. It's through the book in a few places, and it does say in several spots. Do not touch anybody else's tiles. And during the deal in the very beginning, one of the beginning videos, I do want to mention, in case I didn't mention it, I probably did mention it, but I'll just say it again. The dealer does not deal out the tiles in Mahjong like a car dealer does. Everybody takes their own tiles. Some people are being taught incorrectly and they're having the dealer deal out all the tiles, but that is not the way the game is played. Again, the league emphasizes do not touch anybody else's tiles. It just follows suit with that. Nest your jokers between tiles. A joker exchange is always done after you call a tile, but cannot be used to complete an exposure. That's most important. After calling and completing an exposure, if a joker exchange completes the rest of your hand, it can be used to declare Mahjong. That's the exception to be able to using that joker at the same time you call. But again, not in the exposure. All right, some final pointers, and this is probably one of the most important parts, although everything was pretty important. When you're going to play with a group and you're new playing in person, please don't be shy about asking these questions, but you want to ask about their table rules. A lot of times, groups have table rules. You may not feel comfortable with their table rules. You may decide, you know what, this group isn't right for me, but you're not going to know if you don't ask. And then you're going to get into maybe an uncomfortable situation. Ask to look at their 1BM, their flowers, and dragons, because not all tiles look alike in different sets. This will help clear up any confusion that you have right from the get-go. Ask if they play for money, and if so, how much. You want to be prepared. You don't want to come to a game and you have no money on you, and we're not talking about big bucks. Usually $3 or $5 would be the maximum you could lose for the day, but nonetheless, you want to know. And maybe you're not comfortable playing for money yet. That also is a good reason to ask ahead of time. Maybe, again, that group is not right for you. All righty, so this is concluding, and I'm going to stop sharing in a second, but I do want to talk about my book that I have just finished rewriting. So it's new and it's updated, and it's a timeless version. So it uses a timeless card so that when somebody learns through this book and with the timeless card that's included in the book, they can transition to any card. If you know anybody that wants to learn Mahjong, please recommend this right now. Pre-orders are being taken here, and the book will be up on Amazon, both the hard copy and the ebook, probably within the week. It's just about done. As well, if you know somebody who wants to learn, I have a full video series, which those video clips were taken a part of, and I assure you that on YouTube, they are loud and clear and sound fabulous. So again, if you need some refining, these lessons are fabulous and also will get you up and ready for playing in person. And if you're not a subscriber to the MahjCon YouTube channel, I do appreciate your support, and click the bell here to get notifications of any upcoming live stream events that I'm doing. I thank you so much for watching and joining me tonight. I'm going to stop sharing and then we can talk about any questions that you might have. Any questions or anything that you want to add or ask about, you can unmute. And Susan, yes.
Hey, this was wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome,
I
Susan.
have a question and a comment wondering about your reflection. The question is, I noticed when you were building the walls, you pretty much took tiles that were in front of you. And with the groups that I play in, we mix them up, and then we try to pick like all around, just hoping that we're adding another level of randomness. Some people say that's not necessary. What do you think?
Well, yes, honestly, when I do it all different ways. So sometimes I do that. Maybe when I was working on the video production of my series, that wasn't in the forefront of my mind. But I agree that if you want to pick them randomly from different areas, you can. Uh, I know that the mixing of the tiles is so important because I have situations where people have like they don't really mix good and they just move them around in front of them, and then those particular wall tiles, if you're picking them during the deal, especially if that person is east, I mean, I'm seeing like multiples of tiles, and I know that that's because they're not mixed really really well. So
Yeah, I see.
I
Yeah,
say anything you can do to look, it's a style, right? If you and
yeah,
if your group can agree that everybody should do that, that's great too. But it's not always easy to, tell other players what to do, right,
yeah. I
Phyllis?
mean, we're really very friendly group.
Oh, that's
Um,
super. That's super.
and then with stopping the Charleston,
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot better about stopping the Charleston, but I do stop it if I can pass three tiles, but I don't want to let go of anything in my hand in case somebody passes me a tile I want. Like, so I can there's three that aren't going to serve me, but everything else that's left in the rack is going to be needed for this one hand. So that's when I'll stop it. And people will sometimes exchange, sometimes not. But then I only have, you know,
Hmm.
so do you think I mean, I don't want to pass the three and then get one and then have to let go of one I like. So what do you think of that?
Yeah. And that's a good question. So if you have three tiles to pass, and in your hand you have enough jokers and enough of the groupings, take one of the tiles from, let's say, a pung and pass it on. Chances are that tile is going to get discarded early on. And that's what's always happened with
Oh,
me. It's not been kept and used by a player. So you can do that. Uh, Look, there's nothing guaranteed. I always tell everybody there's nothing guaranteed in this game. So I could tell you that every time I do it, it works flawlessly. And then one time, guess what?
right.
Somebody's also playing those tiles and has a bunch of jokers or whatever. But you pretty much can recover that tile. And again, you just have to decide, gee, what if I get another one or two tiles in the next 12 tiles that I look at? What's better, not looking at those tiles or stopping it? For me, I'd rather go on. So,
That's a wonderful answer. I hadn't thought of like the risk if you've got the jokers to just like take something. And
that you can
if
call
it's
right
early
away.
enough,
Right.
I might get it back. I mean, I've thrown stuff out and then gotten it back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna try that because I want to
Okay.
improve. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're so welcome. Okay. Any more questions? Let's see what's in chat. Um, okay, perfect. All right. Well, Alan just said thanks a lot. Really appreciate it, especially with a small group, just learning the game overall, no questions. Okay, no problem at all. And by the way, this will be up on YouTube, so that you can, anybody who didn't get a chance can rewatch it. You could share it with anybody that you know that has not yet played in person. All right. Well, that is it, guys. I think I'm going to go ahead and conclude this session right now. No more questions. Thank you guys so much for watching from YouTube and joining me on Zoom tonight. I will see you on Wednesday night. Skill building. Be there or be square. Good night. All right.